This week, the nation's leading authority on the coronavirus, Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and lead member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force, spoke up about anti-science bias in America. He was speaking with the Assistant Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services for Public Affairs, Michael Caputo, on the Learning Curve podcast.
Well, one of the problems we face in the United States is that, unfortunately, there is a combination of an anti-science bias that people are, for reasons that sometimes are, inconceivable and not understandable, they just don't believe science and they don't believe authority. So when they see someone up in the White House, which has an air of authority to it, who's talking about science, that there are some people who just don't believe that. And that's unfortunate because, science is truth. And if you go by the evidence and by the data, you're speaking the truth.
Caputo pinpointed a problem in America, referring to two acquaintances of his, one who trusts the information that Fauci puts out, the other who doesn't have any faith in experts like Fauci. Lack of faith in experts like Fauci when it comes to public policy is evidenced by the anti-vaxxer movement, global warming skeptics, and objections to evolutionary theory. Very recently, such anti-science discourse has been evidenced by protests against coronavirus safety guidelines and even theories proposing that the coronavirus pandemic is not even real. Opinion, point of view, and free speech are essential to the American democracy. But it is important to note that the founding fathers viewed the democratic process to be intertwined with a respect for science, as argued by philosophy professor Barbara Forrest in the book Anti-Science and Assault on Democracy. So what good is free speech when the populace is misinformed about the qualities of scientific process? A question asked by a professor of biochemistry, Isaac Asimov, back in 1980, a time when many argue was the beginnings of this anti-science movement in America. In his essay, A Cult of Ignorance, he states, I contend that the slogan, America's right to know, is a meaningless one when we have an ignorant population, and that function of free press is virtually zero when hardly anyone can read. Asimov pinpoints the issue in American democracy, where it is considered proper to respect an opinion, even though it is scientifically invalid. There's a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by a false notion that democracy means that my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Susan Jacoby, in her book, The Age of American Unreason, coined the term junk thought and comments on the current celebration and acceptance of anti-scientific rhetoric. The real power of junk thought lies in its status as a centrist phenomenon, fueled by the American credo of tolerance that places all opinions on equal footing and makes little effort to separate facts from opinion. In the demon-haunted world, Science as a Candle in the Dark, famous astronomer Carl Sagan points out that skepticism, when used properly with the true scientific process, can be a reward for democracy and government. But he points out that when not properly used, it can be dangerous. The business of skepticism is to be dangerous. Skepticism challenges established institutions. If we teach everybody, including, say, high school students, habits of skeptical thought, They will probably not restrict their skepticism to UFOs, aspirin commercials, and 35,000-year-old channelers. Maybe they'll start asking awkward questions about economic or social or political or religious institutions. Perhaps they'll challenge the opinions of those in power. Then where will we be? Perhaps that is where we are now, in an era of absolutes, where we cannot respect intellectual achievement that continues to ask legitimate questions. Philosopher Bertrand Russell once said that in the modern world the stupid are cocksure, while the intelligent are full of doubt, referring to how the Nazi movement was able to take over the entire German country. Fauci and Caputo discussed the problem with believing in absolutes.
You know, sir, it's interesting, Doc, because I kind of see that the people who don't believe science are people who believe in absolutes. That the truth is, it's either true or it's not. Right. And in this process, we've seen the models shift, we've seen the data shift, we've seen instruction shift, and I think perhaps those who believe in absolute truth don't really end up believing science that shifts. Don't you think that in the end, the American people have to begin to understand that science isn't absolute truth?
Right. Science is the attempt in good faith to get to the facts, and it isn't perfect. And what happens is that science can be self-correcting. But the beauty of that is that there are so many other people independently who are asking the same questions that sooner or later something that really is true will get confirmed time after time after time.
Yeah. I'm science stunted. I have a problem, I think, like most Americans. But now that I've been here for a little while, I understand that science is kind of an iterative process. And it's one that eventually you arrive at the absolute truth.
Right.
And I think many Americans haven't, they don't get that science is really something that thousands of people participate in, right, to end up on one immutable truth.
Right.